I'm Bridie Jabour, coming to you from Gadigal land, and this is The Full Story, Newsroom edition. After finally meeting with Donald Trump, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese passed another political test and returned home with a win. Domestically, the coalition continued to generate its own headlines, for all the wrong reasons. But even without an effective opposition, is there danger ahead for the Labor government? Today, I'm talking to editor Lenore Taylor, national news editor Josephine Tovey, and head of Newsroom Mike Ticher about what Albanese's and Ley's two very different weeks tell us about the state of Australian politics. It's Friday, the 24th of October. Good morning, Lenore.
Morning, Bridie.
Good morning, Mike.
Hi, Bridie.
And good morning, Joe.
Hi, Bridie.
It's been a big week in Australian politics, both domestically and overseas. The Prime Minister was in the US and finally met Donald Trump. We're going to step through a lot of this. But first of all, Lenore, do you think it's fair to say good week for Albanese, not so good week for Sussan Ley?
Absolutely. I mean, for the Prime Minister, it could scarcely have gone better from a political point of view. The timing was fortuitous because China had just announced restrictions on the export of rare earths, and he went bearing a rare earths deal, so he had a transaction to do. He got a verbal commitment to AUKUS. There was no blow up over our 10% tariffs. The whole thing with, there was, all those acres of newsprint that was spilled saying Kevin Rudd would have to go and Trump would never forgive him. Well, Trump forgave him, so that was all smoothed over. I mean, it really could not have gone better. I mean, there is the kind of non-Trump glasses view of this, which would say, of course, he'd agree to AUKUS. We're giving them billions of dollars for submarines we might not get, and they're not coming till well after Trump is president, unless, let's not go there. And also, why do we even have a 10% tariff with someone we've got a free trade agreement? But putting that kind of reality to one side and just looking at it through the politics of it, it went perfectly for Anthony Albanese. I mean, even Malcolm Turnbull, who is the Prime Minister who's dealt with Donald Trump, said it was 10 out of 10. And yeah, for Sussan Ley, it wasn't a great week.
Yeah, I mean, we were among those who talked about all the things that possibly could have gone wrong before it happened, and none of them did. And even things that could have gone okay went even better than he might have expected, from the point, as Lenore says, like looking through it from the frame of we have a stable and normal relationship with the US, which we kind of don't, or maybe shouldn't. But if you do look at it through that frame, yeah, it was, all the unpredictable things that could have happened in a Trump meeting
did not happen.
Even the ones that did happen were like laughed off, like the Rudd thing, which kind of turned to Albanese's benefit in the end because it was treated as a joke, and turned very much to Sussan Ley's, against what the line they'd been pushing for so long, that he was a liability and he was impeding our access to Donald Trump and our relationships with the US and so on. And eventually they had to kind of very lamely come out and say, actually, yeah, he's doing a pretty good job, and sorry, they didn't say sorry, but we're not going to go with that one anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the optics of this couldn't have gone better for Albanese. I think everybody was sort of holding their breath a bit when they woke up on Tuesday morning. I certainly was. Like, were we going to have another Zelensky moment, or something like what happened with the South African president Ramaphosa, where Trump confronted him with kind of erroneous nonsense in person? So there were a lot of ways this could have gone wrong. Albanese was clearly very well prepared, and as Lenore said, time was actually on his side. Like, all the reporting up to this suggested that the delay, it's been 10 months roughly since Trump was inaugurated as president again, that seemed like a real negative for our relationship, but in the end it turned out to probably be quite a positive. China has tightened controls on critical minerals and rare earths, which played to our advantage, but also things like the Gaza ceasefire coming into effect has probably removed Palestinian statehood from front of mind for Trump as a potential issue. And the Herald also had some interesting reporting this week about Marco Rubio's growing role in the Trump administration. He's more of a traditional Republican hawk, probably values the Australian alliance more than some of the MAGA types who kind of want to blow everything up. He's developed a strong relationship with Penny Wong. So there were a number of factors there that actually worked out really well for Albanese. And there was a real mixture there of sort of luck, but also preparation of him and Rudd going in there with, big numbers, shiny deals, exactly what Trump wants. It made Trump look good. It gave him a sense of victory as well. It was quite glowingly reported in the American media. The New York Times had a big story about the deal on rare earths. So, yeah. But I mean, I guess one counterpoint I would say to this is that I'm wary, and I don't think it's right in this instance, but I'm wary that if we always think that getting along with Trump is a sign of success. Like, Trump is not a leader who we always want to get along with. Like, this is a fairly authoritarian leader. He is, what he's doing on climate change, on children's vaccines, like you name it, there are things there that Australia should be opposing. And it's really important as we go forward that we don't set a benchmark that getting along with Trump, pleasing him with deals is a sign of a good foreign policy for Australia, because it's not.
Yeah. I agree, but you don't want to gratuitously poke him in the eye either.
No, especially at a first meeting. That would be a terrible foot to get off on.
And there was no kind of egregious sucking up and...
No, not a little bit.
Well, there was a little bit, but it wasn't excruciating. Mostly.
Depends on your pain
well,
level.
I suppose so. I mean, he did admire the renovations, in inverted commas, to the White House, which seems to involve knocking half of it down
and painting everything gold.
Yeah, and he didn't have to. Like, they didn't bring up the pharmaceutical benefit scheme. Trump
or
said,
the news media bargaining code, or the social media ban, or any of the things that could have gone
even
wrong.
on defence spending. Trump's like, he's been banging on every kind of the country in the world to increase their defence spending, every other US ally, and at two extraordinary levels. And with Australia, he's like, they're doing what they can.
But there was that interesting side note, I thought, where Trump didn't demand or even talk about a more muscular position towards China. And again, there have been acres of columns written about how this is an impossible situation, and how Anthony Albanese's normalisation of trade and economic relations with China is going to be impossible to sort of square off with Trump. And then Trump sort of said he didn't think AUKUS was needed to deter China from invading Taiwan, and will be just fine, which sort of seems to say he doesn't actually think there will be a conflict in the South China Sea, which good news from our point of view, and also good news and a sort of vindication of Anthony Albanese's strategy of trying to kind of play both of those major relationships at the same time. I mean, that went his way as well.
Do you think that Albanese's ability to navigate tough political tests has been underestimated?
Especially on the international stage, probably is underestimated, just because he came into the prime ministership without having had much previous exposure on an international level. And there have been one or two glitches along the way as well. We saw in his Pacific tour that didn't all go completely according to plan a few weeks ago. But he likes to be underestimated, I think, and to present that facet of his character, and under promise and over deliver, I guess, is how he would want it to be seen. And this is probably the biggest example of that we've had for a while.
And there's another tiny asterisk to all of this, which, given the rhetoric on AUKUS, probably won't be a problem, but it isn't a done deal yet. There still is a review in the US. The Naval Secretary said he wanted to clarify some ambiguities. We don't know what the ambiguities are. So it's possible that something could come around the sort of very nice rhetoric and cause some hiccups there. We just don't know. But I think that's a minor point in an overall very positive picture.
It wasn't just a bad week for the opposition leader this week because of the success of the Trump visit. There's been a lot going on in the coalition domestically. How has that played out for Sussan Ley this week?
Oh, well, it's just been a rolling car crash, really. I mean, they can't agree on anything. They can't agree on whether climate change is a thing. They can't agree on whether they want to jump on the sort of populist anti-immigration bandwagon or not. They can't agree on whether they're economic rationalists or whether they're big government populist interventionists. They can't agree on whether they want to subsidise a new car industry. They can't agree on foreign policy. And I've got to say, I feel a little bit sorry for Sussan Ley, because she was really trying this week to sort of give some speeches that laid down a framework of very traditional liberal values and traditional sort of liberal economic policies as where she wanted to take the party, and they're the things that the broad church used to be able to agree on, and she got completely sort of sideswiped by Barnaby Joyce's rolling caravan of press conferences in his big hat. You know, maybe he's going to join One Nation and maybe he's not and he doesn't know, and everybody in the media sort of looked over there, and Sussan Ley, who was trying to sort of set some pointers for where the coalition should go, got overridden.
Yeah, she did sort of make her own goal, though, I think, this week with the calls for Kevin Rudd to be sacked as ambassador. Yeah. Like, coming off the back of this meeting, she really didn't need to say very much at all. Like, this was the sort of thing you could duck and just try and focus on your own objectives for the week. But she kind of walked right into it by quite histrionically calling for Rudd to be sacked after what was clearly quite a lighthearted moment in the room, a tense and cringeworthy, uncomfortable moment, but fairly lighthearted nonetheless, and trying to suggest there had been some diplomatic incident of Albanese ridiculing Rudd in front of the president, which was just very clearly, from anyone who watched the footage, was not the case. And only 2 days after, or 1 day after doing that, she had Jane Hume, who she dropped from the front bench, come out and say that she thought that was overblown. So immediately she's got sniping from within her own party again. And by a Wednesday afternoon, Ley herself was walking back those comments. So, you know, kind of much ado about nothing, but also making headlines for the wrong reasons. And that was self-inflicted.
Yeah. And there's so much opportunity cost here. Like, there are so many things they could be talking about about the government, what the government's doing, that they are not talking about because they're just talking about themselves, you know, talking across each other. Like on the energy transition, for example, there are so many things that are not going particularly well in the government, but because they're so hung up on net zero as a thing, in some cases the sort of Barnaby Joyce and Andrew Hastie and Matt Canavan and other people who are opposed to net zero are whipping up opposition to it, but on this kind of extreme, this all has to go, essentially climate denial. Really. We have to get rid of everything to do with net zero, not particular things. There are these wind farm projects, or, you know, the lack of consultation in regional areas, which are genuine issues, and the pace of it all, whether it's all going quickly enough or too quickly in some cases, or the wrong places, or investments going into the wrong areas, all kinds of issues that they could be prosecuting but are not, because they're just hammering away at each other on whether they support or don't support a yes/no answer.
And the craziest story of the week, I reckon, was the suggestion that seems to be floating around the coalition that the way through this is to not agree to net zero domestically, but agree to it internationally. I mean, honestly.
You just briefly touched on that, Mike. I want to dig in a little bit more. There are things flying under the radar while Albanese is being praised for this American visit, and while the coalition is just generating its own headlines about the party. What else do we think hasn't had enough attention policy-wise?
Well, I think certainly the new environment laws, which have been hanging around since Graham Samuel did a report for the Morrison government in 2021, which said our environment laws are broken, and the government couldn't get them through the last parliament. And now Murray Watt is trying to get a revised version through this parliament, and that's looking pretty difficult as well. I mean, these are really consequential, important laws. There are different stakeholders with different views. I think Murray Watt's trying very hard to manage the politics of it, but as of Thursday morning, it's looking pretty shaky still.
Housing crisis not solved. Housing prices, there's another sharp rise in housing prices announced this week. Unemployment went up, so surprisingly, in the last figures. Just regular kind of bread and butter issues, the cost of living issues that the coalition was supposed to be fighting the last election on, which are just kind of not being raised up into the headlights at the moment.
And what do you think Australian voters care about more, net zero or housing prices shooting up again?
I thought Sean Carney in the Sydney Morning Herald this week had quite an interesting piece looking at the net zero question for the coalition and drawing a parallel between how Labor had to deal with boat turnbacks and boat arrivals more than 10 years ago, how people on the left of the Labor Party, and not only on the left, but including Anthony Albanese at that time, had vehement disagreements with the coalition government and with attempts to change Labor's policy on that issue. They ultimately did so, and he makes the point that even though they vehemently disagreed, and perhaps many of them still disagree with policy on that, nevertheless they saw that the public agreed with it. It was politically popular. They didn't like it, but once the policy had changed at the top of the Labor leadership, they accepted it and went with it, gritted their teeth, didn't like it, but acknowledged that that was what they had to do. And he's pointing out that that's what the coalition could be doing on net zero if they acknowledge the political reality that most people as the last election showed, there's a strong, most people in Australia do think climate change is a thing, do want action on it. They might not agree with every detail of how the energy transition is going, but that's broadly where they're at. And if they don't like it, there's a political path forward by just kind of you don't have to like it, but you might have to accept it. And I thought that was an interesting way to look at it.
As we know in politics and in life, just because today is good does not mean that all future days are going to be good.
So philosophical.
I'm quite existential at the moment. I think it's the political climate. What are the risks for the Labor government and Albanese specifically in the long term at the moment?
I think the thing that I'm really interested in is where Anthony Albanese's trajectory and the trajectory of the coalition sort of potentially splintering intersect. So far in this term, certainly, we've seen a real vindication of Anthony Albanese's sort of overall philosophy or political strategy of not getting caught in the day-to-day sound bites and sound grabs and day-to-day news cycle fights, but focusing on sort of steady progress and where he wants to go and taking people with him and sometimes not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good and really trying to make Labor into a long-term governing proposition. And he's sort of grown in the job and he's assumed authority. I think the thing that we're not really clear on is, well, there's going to be dissent coming from within Labor at some point. Like at some point, people are going to say, you're not using the mandate to do enough, etc. That might come on the EPBC laws. I don't know. But the thing I'm really interested in is if there's some breakaway from the coalition and we do get some sort of populist nativist push here, how does Anthony Albanese's strategy work in counter to that? If there's a Jacinta Nampijinpa Price or Andrew Hastie or Barnaby Joyce or whomever barnstorming the country with a very simplistic anti-immigration message or net zero message or whatever, how does the I'm not fighting the daily news cycle fit against the I'm really trying to hijack the daily news cycle with this nativist strategy work? I think that's what is fascinating to me and why I think both these trajectories are really interesting to watch in tandem.
Yeah, I think that rise of a populist right in Australia is not a realistic imminent threat. I think the coalition is in such disarray. I think One Nation is so far from being a viable sort of political force. We're not talking about a sort of a immediate term, but in the longer term, things like leaving a housing crisis to fester and housing to become increasingly unaffordable. You don't want to go down the path of America where inequality becomes so entrenched that you really drive people to extremes, you drive distrust in government. I know this government is thinking about that and they would say that they are doing a lot on housing, but as we've seen from, figures out this week, house prices are not coming down. Some of the major structural reform that a lot of people believe is needed in order to address that, particularly in places like Sydney, is not happening. It's not being talked about. There are political risks deeper into the future that if Australia, allows inequality to continue to flourish in the way that we have, that it will give succor to the right and to arguments around immigration that nobody wants to see.
And I think our voting system, as we've discussed many times, is sort of a bulwark against this. But even if it's not it's like the nativist right is not looking like a governing force, which I doubt it ever will, it can do a lot of damage and really throw Anthony Albanese off course. That's sort of what I think is more of a near-term danger than any viable sort of political threat. It's like a threat to the strategy that he's using effectively to now.
Yeah, I think there's a few things here. One is that the sort of euphoria that might be sweeping through Labor at how well they're going doesn't exactly match their standing in the opinion polls. They're still like around 35% primary vote in most of the polls. They're doing well as far as the public is concerned, but it's not invulnerable from that point of view. Another thing I think is Trump, obviously. Things went really well for them this week. He could turn around next week and say something completely different on AUKUS, on anything.
Everything.
Everything. You just never know what's around the corner and how they will react to it. So, yeah, I'm sure they are not well, I'll use the word euphoric. I'm sure there's a very, a really good feeling among government ministers at the moment. But yeah, I would be surprised if they were taking anything for granted.
And even Anthony Albanese's net approval ratings are still sort of evens.
Yeah.
So, there's as many people almost who disapprove of him as approve of him, which you'd think, given the successes he's having, should be higher. So there's not you couldn't call him a beloved Prime Minister.
Yeah.
He's just governing competently and people like that.
Yeah.
I guess that just seems exceptional at the moment in 2025 when you look around the world.
Governing competently. Let's stick with that. That's good.
Now it's time for what we can't get out of our heads this week. Lenore, what was that for you?
It is the image of people at the behest of Donald Trump literally knocking down the east wing of the White House, actually mowing down the home of democracy to build a ballroom. As Emma Brock said in a column which I really recommend, occasionally life gives you scenarios that are so on the money it's impossible to do anything with them. Boris Johnson getting stuck halfway down a zip wire while waving 2 union flags, for instance, or Liz Truss getting lost while attempting to leave a room. When demolition crews moved into the White House to knock down part of the East Wing at the behest of Donald Trump, it felt once again like we were living in post-satirical times. I can't really say it any better.
It's not even a metaphor. It's just literally what is happening. Mike, what was it for you?
Well, sorry to harp on about Donald Trump even more than we have already, but the piece I really liked this week was an anonymous opinion article, which we don't run that often, but about from an Australian citizen who is also an American citizen, and they wrote about how they were renouncing their US citizenship. It wasn't all to do with Trump. This person wrote about their family history and some of the contributions their family had made to American history in the past. And that was kind of really, I think, a sad thing to think about, how people feel like they're losing their very positive thoughts about the US in this time.
Joe, what can't you get out of your head this week?
Okay, just signalling a tone shift here.
Anything that's not about Trump, I welcome.
It's not. So mine was a story in The Cut this week about how to wear Vibram toe shoes. So these are the shoes you might have seen sort of like the hikers in your life or sort of boomer dads wearing, that is like grippy. They're almost somewhere between a sock and a shoe that has individual cutouts for your toes, and they've been popular as a sort of very niche product for a long time, but this is the year they've really spilled over as a fashion item. And The Cut, which is the sort of fashion and beauty offshoot of New York Magazine, had a segment on how to kind of style it for fall in America.
Please do tell. How do you make them look good?
Well, you just wear them, basically.
Okay.
And I have mixed reactions to this. On the one hand, I'm physically revolted by these shoes and always have been. They give me a huge ick, and I think they're quite disgusting. But there's part of me that also admires the sort of, choosing shoes, clothes in general, young women today that are not kind of catering to a kind of sexy male gaze. I came of age in the stiletto Sex in the City era. Those shoes were bloody awful. They ruined women's feet and women's bodies. And the idea that Gen Z are instead choosing to wear the ugliest, most comfortable shoes possible, I kind of love it.
Yeah, it's very different from when we were teenagers. I think that they are hideous, but I am such a fashion victim, I'm sure you'll see me in them in the office in 6 months.
Amazing.
Wow.
Don't tell me what you really think when you see it.
We already have.
Thank you so much for joining me this week, Joe.
Thanks, Bridie.
And thank you, Mike.
Thanks a lot.
And thanks, Lenore.
Thanks, Bridie.